Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. Right now, every CTO is being asked to do more with less. Metrics aren't optional. They're how you prove your impact and prioritize what matters. In this episode, I'm speaking to Lior Gerson, co-founder and CEO at Target Board, about why KPIs aren't just a reporting tool, they're critical infrastructure for modern CTOs. We unpack why so many tech leaders struggle to track what matters, how data can become your defensive shield in leadership, and what it really takes to align engineering, product, and business goals. Lior shares hard-won lessons from e-commerce to B2B SaaS, and we break down a practical playbook any CTO can apply. If your KPIs are either mystical or meaningless, this episode could be your signal to act. I'm your host, Adam Horner. As a coach for CTOs from startups to enterprises, I empower tech leaders to escape the cycle of lurching from crisis to crisis and build the skills to lead with confidence, clarity, and purpose. If you've ever felt like there's no instruction manual for being a CTO, you're not alone. I felt that too. And I hear it constantly from the CTOs and technology leaders that I work with. That's exactly why I created this podcast and why I release it every week, sponsor-free and free to you. Because CTO leadership is hard and you shouldn't have to figure it all out alone. Now I brought everything together under one brand, the CTO Playbook. It's the new home for this podcast, our growing community, and a full suite of coaching programs designed to support you through every stage of the technology leadership journey. Think of it like a mountain. The hard climb begins not at the very bottom, but at base camp, laying the foundation, preparing to lead, and setting your direction. Then comes the elevate phase where you climb, apply what you've learned, and face more complex, high-stakes challenges. And when the terrain gets steep and personal, there's CTO Ascent, a one-to-one coaching program offering tailored support for the most demanding parts of your journey. I recently announced the launch of CTO Basecamp, a new cohort-based coaching program for technology leaders, strengthening the leadership foundation. If you're ready to stop figuring out the hard way and start leading with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact, the waitlist is now open, with early access and a discounted rate for those who join today. To learn more about CTO Basecamp, CTO Ascent, and what's coming next with CTO Elevate, visit www.thectoplaybook.com. If you're ready to lead with more intention, structure, and support, everything's there for you. Lior, welcome to the CTO Playbook. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here, Adam.
Now, I know that we crossed paths on LinkedIn talking about leadership, data, and I've been following your work since then. But for those who might not have come across you yet, can you just give us a bit of a quick flyover across how you got to where you are today?
So I've been in the field as CTO and CPO, different roles for about 20 years now. And we started e-commerce, right? So I was VP of product for a company called My Supermarket. We did online price comparison for supermarkets in the UK. We had about 20 million monthly active users. We had like a mobile app that was number one. I have screenshots. 10 years ago, we were ahead of Tinder, ahead of eBay, ahead of Amazon. It was super cool. And when you're doing e-commerce or consumers and stuff in general, you're very much on top of your KPIs. Like you have to know everything that goes on in your business, and everybody knows what the business is trying to achieve. But then, I went into SaaS, into B2B companies, and they don't know anything. Like, I went into a company and they didn't have any BIs. They were like doing 100 million ARR. You have no idea what's operating the business. So I said, you know what? Fine, do something. Let's see what you can do. And like day one, you found like key metrics were like 90% off. Like you don't have 100,000 visitors a month to yours. So you have 10. And that's very significant. And when it's in successful companies, you sort of understand what the waste is. What's the actual potential? And when you're running and you're churning and you're trying to deliver day in, day out, something you miss that. You miss like, what is actually moving the needle? How do we take this company to the next level? So doing that for a very long time. So I said, okay, I understand, my co-founder, we understand how the world operates and we want to help companies do that better.
And you found it was a huge contrast then? Was it particularly between consumer-oriented startups or scale-ups and SaaS startups? Or was there other patterns to it as well in terms of the difference?
So I think it depends, right? When we were working on My Supermarket, The CEO came, he was a super smart guy. Like, he used to tell me things that only years later I'd comprehend. But he came from McKinsey. He came from that background. He was co-CEO of Wix, came from a very strong technical, analytical background, and he knew how he wanted his business to run. So I basically learned everything I know about that from him.
Okay, so that was sort of your benchmark comparison then. And you've worn both the CTO and the product hat, but how has that sort of helped to shape your understanding the importance and relevance of metrics to, for example, decision-making?
And in general, as a C-level, having a wide perspective on how the organization works is super helpful because you understand how your peer works, you understand what's important for them, you understand how to get your point across, you're able to give an opinion on what works and what doesn't work. And I've actually done multiple roles. I was a CMO, CPO, CTO, CIO. I consulted for Macy's and Sephora and Kroger on C-level on these topics.
All of those are consumer companies, aren't they?
Yeah. You want to have the right perspective. You want to understand if the company is going in the right direction, how you're supporting that as a CTO, and what you're measured by. I know a lot of your audiences are fractional CTOs. It's really important to know what you're measured by and how you want to come across and how you want to measure yourself to make the point that you're making an impact, right? And that founders don't need that. Founders, CTOs don't need that. They raise money, they feel they're safe, they don't have to prove anything. But when you're a professional executive, you're in a different position. You have to justify your salary. You have to make sure that leadership, that management, that the CEO knows the impact that you're having on his team immediately, like 30, 60, 90, and going forward.
Yeah, so you can see that the inflection point from change when it should happen to when it's reflected in numbers to literally show the value. So I've definitely walked into a post-Series A company where the data situation was, let's call it immature and be generous, shall we? There were no meaningful KPIs, there were no dashboards, there was basically people just trying to hold together a platform that was on its last legs, honestly. And I actually had to reverse engineer some basic numbers from, pretty much from scratch there. And Excel was my ally in that, which seems a little bit crazy in a SaaS world. But just to get my sort of initial bearings and to try and find out where my strategy should be taking me. I mean, if you had moments that are sort of as stark as that, when you realize there's just nothing.
Yeah. So going back to that company I was speaking about, so to put things into perspective, like before that I was in e-commerce. So to put things into perspective, before that I was in an e-commerce company. We were doing about 100 million in revenue per year. And when we did our Series B, the lead investor came and told me, Lior, it's the best run company I've ever seen. And we were selling cars online. We knew everything about everything that's happening in the business, a very complicated business with financing and insurance and parts and stock and so on and so on. And it moved really fast. Like we were super efficient. But then when I went to a much bigger SaaS company, I felt like everything was so slow. And I felt like I can measure, I can tell where things are stuck. I understood why things weren't moving. And I went to the CEO and I told him, listen, like nothing's moved here. Everything could be 10 times as fast. And he told me, Lior, I know, but I didn't bring you here to fix my company. That was sort of an aha moment. Yeah, but I can. We're wasting millions every month on just waste. So I think that's where, the shoe dropped.
And in terms of that, when somebody's got the attitude of, you're not here to fix my company and you're thinking just some basic numbers would help you run things much more efficiently. Was that where you realized that the challenge wasn't because people didn't know how to, it's just because they literally just couldn't?
I think it depends on the company. So I've seen startups that try to run really fast and they think they don't realize the benefit that they'll have by having the numbers to support their business and their decisions. And they don't want to invest in it. And I've seen companies where they just don't have people don't want to be accountable, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
So you have engineering managers, you have CTOs, and they like to talk about transparency and accountability and velocity, but they don't actually want to be accountable for it, right? And the bigger the company gets, right, the more wasteful it is, the less efficient it is. And it's easier to talk high about how great we are, but we don't actually want to be tracked by that.
So there's literally a case where there's they don't want to be measured. They don't want to see the effect, the impact that they're having, that they just literally don't care.
That is super common. Like you want people as a manager, right? You need your actions to be aligned with your motivations. If I don't have a motivation to put more accountability on myself, why would I do that? Why would I make myself just work harder if I don't really care? So I think that splits managers and CTOs in general into two groups, right? the superhero protagonist archetype, which wants to make the world a better place and wants to build and drive this super efficient machine, and the other that's just there for the fun and the pay. We see that all the time. But we had a customer and they were super excited to put target board in and start getting like engineering metrics. But once they did, they were like, oh, well, we don't want anybody to actually see this. So they didn't use a system, but they were kind enough to allow us to work with other groups in the company. So we went to the customer support and we gave them KPIs. We went to the product management and we gave them KPIs. They were super happy. And by the time we went through that cycle, we actually came back to the R&D and now they had a lot of pressure. They were like, okay, now we really need these KPIs because everybody else has our KPIs.
So everybody else could see it and realize where the lack of efficiency was then.
Because that's the point. Like if you're not doing your job, right? If you're slacking off, if you don't care about the inefficiencies and how they're affecting the other groups in the company, how they're affecting the big machine, somebody else is going to notice, right? It's going to affect somebody else. It's going to make somebody else's problems bigger and they're going to come back to you.
No, absolutely. I've found that in early stage startups, there are often CTOs who are sort of a bit data agnostic, but that's only at the very early stage. Then we get later on, the hunger for data almost becomes insatiable and unstoppable. And you also mentioned as well that KPIs can act as a sort of you described it as a defensive shield, a way to protect CTOs from the misunderstandings. Where does that come from? Because that seems to be on the other end of the spectrum, if I've understood you right.
Think about yourself as, absolutely. So think about yourself as a CTO. You're providing a service to the company. You're an enabler, right? And when somebody has problems with their technology, with their processes, a lot of the times they'll come to you and say, hey, this is not working well. We're waiting for this customer and it's getting delayed. Or we're getting more support tickets and people are complaining about the new version and we have quality issues, right? You need data to say, guys, I'm doing my job. I'm actually doing a damn well job. And when you have new support tickets that are escalated to engineering, then we, to get handled on the same day. And by the way, most of our capacity is allocated to supporting the business. And you need that data. But getting that data is not always easy. A lot of the time you're passive, you're reactive. You have to say, oh, you know what, let me get back to you on this. And you don't pull the data because you don't have the time. So having that ready as a toolbox where you can just put your hand in and say, hey, this is what's actually happening. I don't know what you're talking about. It diffuses into our situation. It gives you control. It gives you leverage. We see CTOs doing great things with data when they have it.
And what's generally the barrier to getting data in place? Because when almost every CTO I know wants to have data, a lot of people talk about getting a data pipeline, but there must be some challenges. So bring us into that room. Give us an idea of what is the things that sort of stop people from putting a data pipeline and a dashboard in place in the first place.
So I think here we also see a few archetypes. We have CTOs that we see who just care about like the boilerplate metrics. So they'll just plug something in. They want their DORA metrics. They don't care what it does. Just want to report that they have metric, that they are measuring something, right? They don't care if it's impacting the business. But if you're really into making an impact, if you really care about making the business better, if you really care about, being a great manager and making great impact on your team, then it's much more involved, right? You have to make them personal. You have to make them really tie in to the business results and to what actually makes a difference for your company. And it's going to be different for every company. Like every company has the same problems, right? It's, it's going to be in investment allocation. It's going to be in AI adoption. It's going to be in plan versus actual, but it's going to be different for everybody, for every company. It's going to be different for different teams in the company. So different managers, different level will have different needs for what they need to improve and streamline their operation. And that creates, you have to be in a place of vulnerability. You have to be very open-minded and say, okay, what do I actually need to improve? What do I actually need to do to improve my situation, my positioning in the company, my perception in the company, my key results, and so on and so on.
Cool. And so once you've begun to ask those questions, what's generally the next step from there?
You have to put in place a process and a framework and tools, that information. You're busy. You don't have the time to go in and pull the data. And you don't put it on a developer to say, hey, can you go and pull data from a lot of different places because you have better things to do and they're going to hate it. So you need to put the tooling in place. And the problem with normal tooling is that you either take a vertical analytics system, which is limited in the amount of customization that's going to provide. And the more legacies, the more changes the company went through, the older it is, it's going to be harder to get the data accurate the way you want. Or you build a BI team, or you try to get in the queue for the company BI team. We find that both of these sort of methods are lacking. That's why we built Targetable. We try to give companies the best of both worlds. On one hand, we'll connect to any system you have, any data source. We'll give you full customization, exactly the way you work, exactly the way you want to measure things. On the other hand, it's very quick and it just works.
It's a fairly good advert for it there to be able to say that it just works, because I think that's one of those key things. Because often I've ended up working with BI teams, and BI teams have a very varying level of priority within organizations, and therefore sometimes quite varying different levels of competency as well. I was with one startup, and there was a couple of different teams who wanted some metrics, and the BI team basically came back and said, yeah, we can get that for you in 6 weeks, and we can update it 6 weeks later after that. And I had to be the voice of reason and say, actually, that is not reasonable. That's not okay. KPIs kind of need to be turned around quicker than that. And so therefore, when you come up against these kind of bottlenecks where teams just aren't delivering, is this the kind of situation where you can come in and quite literally replace entire teams?
Basically, you can replace entire teams in days. And I think you're hitting the nail. What are you hitting?
Hitting the nail on the head.
So yeah, we can replace teams in days, and you're hitting the nail on the head. It's not only that you're in the queue. Like the PI team is building a product. They have a database, they have different tools, they have pipeline, but they're building a product. They need specs. They need to understand the requirements. It's going to take a lot of time from you. It's going to be cycles, it's going to be QA. It's all this entire operation that every company thinks they have to invent the wheel, even though, as a CTO, you pretty much need the same KPIs as every other CTO. So it'll be slightly modified, but you're not inventing the wheel. It's like, this is what I need to do my job, right? If I took you from one customer to another customer, you need the same KPIs. Right, you just need them adjusted to however the company works.
Yeah, and I often find that there's varying different levels of understanding of, for example, KPIs and OKRs and ways of measurement and what good looks like. And that's one of those things I think where, you mentioned the DORA trap already. There's one set of metrics and we can use those, but don't necessarily tell you the whole story. In terms of being able to prepare a variety of different metrics that people can look at, that's one of those areas where I see, at least organizations I've worked in kind of get a little bit stuck at times. They sort of focus on one set of metrics over another set of metrics. They work on one set of stakeholders over another set. Normally the executive team gets the first dibs at getting the data that they want. Second is normally the sales team because they're the ones that end up bringing in the revenue according to them. So in terms of building together what good looks like, do you have sort of a definition of what good KPIs are and how that should be framed?
Absolutely. I just want to say that we've seen companies doing like years and years of steering committees on which KPIs they should track. And they don't get anywhere because, by the time they sign the committee off, they're like, the people are different. And they never get to, if they get to the tools, they're stuck. We used to have a joke that, half the CTO time is just replatforming.
It's not really a joke though, is it? That's reality often.
It's reality, yeah. You're updating the reports and you don't actually get to use them. But yeah, I think the real KPIs are the ones that tied to the business and the business results. So like DORA metrics, I don't think anybody other than the CTO cares about DORA metrics. Like nobody in the business cares, nobody understands them. You have to tie into the business and the business results, and then you have like metrics that are usually evergreen. Like it doesn't matter how you work, it doesn't matter if you track lines of code, which some people still do, then okay, it doesn't actually tell you anything, it doesn't actually have a business impact, and that's disregarding the fact that the AI writes all the code now. But if you talk about, like quarterly plan versus actual, if you talk about velocity, if you talk about quality, then people get it, right? So if we take down production incidents, that's meaningful. If we respond quicker to customer escalated requests, or if customer has like custom features, then you deliver them faster. If you're able to align with the company's SLA and support the business, that has measurable impact for the business. You can quantify it and you can explain it and people get it.
And I think crucially, you can correlate it back to dollars left in the bank account at the end of the month, which I think is one of those things that some engineers, some leaders even, have a tendency to lose track of and focus on numbers that are proxies, but not necessarily the right proxies.
Yep. Also, KPIs that measure your actual costs, cloud cost, AI costs, they're important. If you let them get out of hand,
And what I find often with good KPIs in place, it allows most people to get a basic understanding of, or basic profit and loss, which sounds really obvious that everybody should understand. But actually, I think a lot of people who are, they sort of see the salary come into the bank at the end of the month, don't necessarily make the connection between that and the revenue that comes into the business, the costs that go out of the business, and what's left at the end as being, well, that's where my salary comes from, that differential. And I think one of the things that I've seen in organizations is that good KPIs allow people to get curious and begin to understand, okay, so that's where my pay actually comes from. That's the derivative of me getting a pay rise at the end of the year, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've seen organizations that sort of take that end to end, like really take that end to end. So from functional squads that have their own KPIs to the P&L of those squads. But a lot of the times it's harder because you have to really delist that also, like when you're in the sales process. And a lot of companies we do that in the R&D, but won't take that all the way, right? So when they sell to a customer, like everything will still be jumbled together or bundled together. So it's hard to associate or attribute the actual income to the actual squad, even though it is possible.
But you've got to do that with some sort of splitting or proxying of metrics of the value in some way to assign relative value. And that could be different for different customers in terms of what the reason why they actually buy a bundle of products, for example.
Yeah. It does help if you delineate between core product and expansions, and you have the different squads working on the core and the expansion. That makes it easier. But companies that do that, they have a huge advantage in terms of how they manage.
But that comes down to business decision in the first place, to be conscious and align around what the metrics actually are and structure the teams and processes in order to be able to make it easy to track and measure that, literally by team. Yeah. So I think that kind of gives away a strategic alignment from the beginning, which companies that don't have good dashboards, don't have good BI data, they don't have that mindset in the first place. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, you need a very minded CEO to drive that from as early on as possible. But you see that companies that do that, they break away. They have amazing results.
And I think that's that predictability. So, I mean, in terms of when we spoke briefly about the right things to measure and what the wrong things to measure, one of the things that I've seen in, let's call them medium sophisticated organizations, is they have a distinction between the numbers they should be tracking day to day and those numbers that they should be making a difference to. And generally, I view it as, well, there's KPIs, key performance indicators, which are the measurement of ongoing performance. And then the OKRs are often used for how do we make a change to that? So a key result might be to make a change to KPI by increase it by 5%, for example. Is that sort of the same view that you have? And do you see a frequent confusion between OKRs and KPIs in that way? I mean, first of all, do you see it the same way?
So I think what you're describing is like OKRs by the book. And some companies do implement OKRs by the book, but most companies that I've had the pleasure of working or speaking with actually use the terms interchangeably, right? So they'll say they're doing OKRs, but they'll actually do KPIs. And they'll try to measure everything. And instead of being aspirational targets, it'll all be measurable and actual targets that they have for the immediate quarter or the immediate year. And I think OKRs are very limiting because it's very top-down. It's essentially the CEO saying, listen, this is what I want you to do, and I don't care about anything else. Like everything else you have to do, just figure it out. And that's not how your job works, right? If somebody wants you to deliver a feature, but you have 80% you have to do on customer support and tech debt, but nobody cares about that, that's a problem. It makes it very hard to operate and explain, hey, I understand that this feature was super important, but I actually couldn't get to it. And I think that's where, and it goes back to something you said earlier, being able to track everything. And that's a bit of what we do with Storyboard. We create all the KPIs for you. So you don't have to ask the question of, hey, is this happening? Is it not happening? Like, do I need to track this or don't I need it? Everything is laid out in front of you, all the metrics that are relevant for your job, and you can decide how to leverage them and what to show and what goes into the OKR and what doesn't go into the OKR that you're trying to present. But it's still there. Because if it wasn't there, then you would just focus on building and tracking your OKRs. And you won't have the option to leverage the display. Listen, it's super cool, the OKR stuff, but I actually have all these other things going on that you're discounting. And you can't discount them because they're, what's keeping the ship afloat and what's actually affecting the speed that we're going.
So getting the alignment really behind the leadership, the measurement, whether you call it OKRs, KPIs, or anything else, is actually the more fundamental point here.
Yeah. And I think, all these stories about companies that had to stop everything and start from scratch or pivot or you just, do like a quarter of refactoring, right? That doesn't happen from the OKRs. That happens from the CTO saying, listen, this is super cool, but nothing's going to happen here unless we stop and fix this. So you need an effective way to track and measure and present that point across, right? And it's so trivial. Like if you're coming in black and you're saying, hey, I want to explain this problem, but I have to think and spend time and figure out how you even get to the data to present it. It's challenging.
It is a tough one, isn't it? And so let's talk about how we can actually try and avoid that situation and make it smooth. And let's get into your playbook, shall we? So let's say I'm a CTO. Maybe I've got a team of 30 to 50 people, probably, let's say, Series B stage, something like that. And I've got a CEO who wants some sort of clarity, and a CPO who wants to understand the velocity, and a CRO who wants predictability, because every revenue person wants predictability of revenue, right? And it's not that realistic. Where, as a CTO, do you start? What are your steps that you would recommend?
So traditionally, I don't know, because you're going to need to find the resources to build it. And you will, if you're really big, Series B, or okay, let's hire a BI team, let's make it a project. And I'll show the dashboard next year. Today, you could pick a target board. We plug into all the your system. We'll plug into Jira, to PagerDuty, to GitHub, to Jenkins, to your product data, to your Salesforce, to your HubSpot, to whatever. And we'll automatically build all these metrics for you. So that they're laid out in front of you. You just click and choose the ones you want to present. And you could not click the ones you don't want to present and present it.
And so that's everything from the CRM data all the way through to the DevOps platform then.
Yeah. And we automatically build your semantic layer, so we connect all the systems together, we clean the data, we fix it. We essentially replace the work that the BI team would have done in a year in a couple of days.
And that's because you're basically following a tried and trusted path that you've walked multiple times, and I've seen the sort of the standard, if you like, best ways to put those together. Is that essentially the magic that underlies it?
Good. We just automated the process that every BI team does when it starts, of collecting the data, putting in the process to clean it, to fix it, to model it, to create those master tables, to define the metrics, to combine the systems, to build it for it. Just automated everything and made it work better. So today we can do things that a BI team never did, like with alerts, notifications, and insights. It's pretty cool.
And so once we've done all of that, so we've used target board, we've got all those difficult bits out of the way, or what used to be the difficult bits, what becomes the hard bit now? What's the new standard to go from there to being awesome, basically?
I think it just makes you awesome. But the hard bit is saying, how do I put this into effect with the team? Because what we found is that, and we didn't find it, like the industry found it. Managers want KPIs. Managers need the control. They want the control. They want the leverage. But when it comes to holding the team accountable, it's a different story. So it makes it super easy to present what your agenda is, what you're trying to achieve, and what your actuals are. But when you're saying, okay, now I want the team to change their behavior, then I think we're a force multiplier. We help with compliance. We help with making things happen. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. We can raise a notification when something is stuck in code review, or if somebody's over allocated, or if somebody is not, a project is, not on the trajectory to hit its milestones. But from there, to take the decision and say, okay, now I need to make the tough call to decide what I'm leaving out, what I'm going to deprioritize, how I'm going to move people around, how I'm going to have that tough conversation with my team leader, because getting the automatic notification it's not enough for them to change their behavior. You still have to be a manager, right? It's like AI won't do that for you.
Definitely. And I think understanding the actual fundamental business model, and therefore what the goals are, what the leadership goals are that are actually aiming for, to be able to put that into context, this becomes once again the key area to make sure you understand. So do you think that having a good BI platform in place, whether it's targetable or anything else, creates a more level playing field for more people to understand the actual implications of decisions then?
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, do you think that once you've solved the hard problems of getting the data integrated and creating the dashboards, creating all the metrics there, I mean, because we talk about there being, lies, down lies, and statistics, we can use numbers to show almost anything. But if we have the numbers available to us to use them, surely we need to have a more thorough understanding than we've ever had before of the business model, the leadership goals, the overall aim of the team, the group, the department, the organization.
So I think that's where the saying culture trumps strategy comes from. It's all about culture. I've seen management teams where everybody just cares about their own KPIs and they don't actually care what's happening with the different departments or different leaders. And they don't care what effect their behavior has on different leaders. And they don't actually care what their actual performance is. Like, you had a great pleasure of working with a toxic CRO that was not selling anything, but he had all the excuses in the world of why it's somebody else's fault. Even though the data was like, you got everything you asked for and you got it on time and it works. And actually the data shows that there's no inbound lead pipeline. So that's why you're not selling. It's not anybody else's fault, it's your fault. But then also having that piece of data in that same example doesn't necessarily going to mean that the CEO is going to have an easy job replacing them, because, they might be invested in hiring that person in the first place. So having the data does not ensure that the company runs smoothly. It does give the company the option of running much more smoothly and for the different members of the executive team to work better together. But at the end of the day, it's all just people. In a perfect world, people could work great together without having the data, but it's not.
Okay, so to remove the level of luck out of it, let's try and put all those key points together into a bit of a playbook then so we can follow that. So I think the first thing then that we've said several times is, number one, understand the business model and understand the leadership goals. Number two, and I think this is probably quite important here, is to have a relatively small number of KPIs that are really meaningful. Number three, make sure that those are aligned across the exec team and the team levels. And that sounds really obvious to me. I'm laughing as I say it, but it's one of those things where actually that alignment is one of the hardest pieces, isn't it? Number four, targets that actually work. Because I think if we set targets that are unattainable or are wishful thinking, then we might as well not have the target anyway. People give up and hope on them if they aren't realistic targets.
I agree, especially if it's over a long period. Like if you keep setting targets that don't make sense, then it might infer that there's a bigger problem.
That's fine.
It goes back to the example of bad KPIs or KPIs that support the business in the wrong direction. If you know, as a CTO, that the ship is going in the wrong direction, it's a planned pivot. There is a planned change, but you're still working to deliver as fast as much as possible in that wrong direction, you're just creating debt, right? So having those KPIs aligned would make a huge difference. If you know that there's a pivot coming, if you know that the CEO is thinking about changing direction, then your immediate KPIs should be, how do I adjust my team, my department to make that transition as easy as possible? How do I remove that? How do I automate things? How do I minimize the amount of support that I'll have to give to that old direction so that we can move as fast as possible to the new one?
Absolutely. So aligned targets with realistic targets then. And then I think the next part of it, if I've understood it right, basically is as it should be in every organization, then track over time and adapt it. So crank the handle on execution and keep adjusting course and speed to match the new KPIs.
Yep.
Cool. And that, I think, basically summarizes the playbook, doesn't it? I mean, the most important part of that is a scalable reporting platform that you can use, whether that's built by a BI team or whether it's used by dropping in a platform like Target Board. Lior, if you were to give a single piece of advice to a CTO who's just jumped into the hot seat, they've just been promoted to CTO and they've just started on their role right now, they've perhaps got a team that they're only vaguely familiar with, what would be the one piece of advice you would give a new CTO?
Reach out to me. We have amazing success with CTOs entering like new companies and trying to understand who's who, what's working, what's not working, and like what the impact we have on like the initial phase before you start getting into the momentum of everything, before you get used to the way things are, and then you have to spend like 6 months to say, oh, now I feel ready and comfortable to change things. Huge difference.
Cool. So start off with some good numbers at the beginning and use Target Board to do that. How can they get hold of you? Where's the best place to find Target Board?
Links.
Okay, we'll put that link in the show notes at the end. If you listen to this and you realize your KPIs are either mystic or meaningless, take this episode as your signal to act. Lior, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Likewise, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Just before you go, I'd like to ask you for one thing in return for putting together all these episodes of the CTO Playbook podcast for you. Please leave a review. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you're on, leaving a quick review will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.